Hey, and welcome to Bible 365. I am your host, Kathy Carter, and I am reading through my Bible in 365 days. I'm using the 1 year chronological Bible reading plan, which you can find online at 1yearbibleonline.com. And so you just download that reading plan. It is free. You would download the chronological one. Make sure you hit on chronological. They have a whole bunch of reading plans. And then this is historical, so it goes from beginning to end, but it does it in a historical context, which helps you understand the Bible better. I think it helps you understand the Bible better. And so before I begin with my backup, I wanted to actually wear these other glasses, which again is from my Temu haul, but I feel like you guys won't take me seriously. So I just wanted to show them. All right, so for anyone who's watching. But I feel like as I do my lesson, so to speak, you guys will do nothing but stare at my wild and crazy glasses. So I'm just trying to get used to them more. But anyway, so this is part of my Temu haul. Although I love them, I'm not going to wear them today. Maybe eventually. Okay. Although they do go with my outfit amazingly. But so we are in the book of Ecclesiastes. And if you have been sticking with me, which I really hope that you have, we are on day 150. I didn't have any of my notes in front of me because I was really busy with my glasses. Okay, we are in day 158. It is June 6th, and we are in Ecclesiastes 1:12 through 6. So if this is your first time with me, please listen today to see how you like it, to see if this resonates at all with you. And then I really want you to subscribe to the channel so you can go all the way back to the beginning, right? You would get notifications. You go all the way back to day 1 and start at Genesis. Take your time. If it takes more than a year, then it takes more than a year, and that's fine. What I really want you to do, the most important thing that you can be doing for yourself, something that God absolutely wants us all to do, is to read your Bible. It's to use your own brain, to use your own heart, your own mind, your own soul, right? All of these things that God has given you as a gift. And he has given you the ability to read the Bible. I'm just kind of like a helper. I'm assisting you along with, of course, encouragement, because I really want you to read. And then anything else, like I try to give the basis of the passages in which that we're reading. It's a lot, so it's a big chunk every day. So I try to give kind of the gist of everything that's going on, and then I share highlights. I share what stood out to me, but I always like to hear what stood out to you as well. And as some of you comment, and I love it, I love reading them. And I try to get back to you as soon as possible, although that does take a few days sometimes. Okay, so we are in the book of Ecclesiastes, which we started yesterday. And the book of Ecclesiastes is most likely written by King Solomon. So he never names himself, but he does call himself teacher. And he does say he's a king. And he does say he's king over Israel. And he does say he's a son of King David. And so this leads me as a reader to probably believe that it's Solomon. Today's chapters, he talks a lot about wisdom. And if you remember going back, Solomon was the wisest man that lived now. He asked God, God visited him while he was sleeping and said, "You're going to be the king." And, he asked him what he wanted. And Solomon said, "I want wisdom in order to best judge my kingdom with righteousness and justice." And so God gave him an abundance of wisdom. And he said, "Because you asked for wisdom, I'm going to give you abundance of everything else also." Right? So then in here, he talks a lot about how he is wise and how he does all of this kind of in wisdom, believe it or not. And so I'm making the assumption that it is King Solomon. It's also called Ecclesiastes, which essentially means he is gathering the people to hear this. Solomon, as we know, wrote more than 3,000, according to scripture, wrote more than 3,000 proverbs and more than 1,000 songs. This could be considered a proverb, could be considered a song. I'm not really sure the way in which they did it. We don't really have any of that information. And so we're not sure the way in which it was relayed to the people, but we know that it was relayed to the people. It's taken from the same word, and I mentioned this yesterday, ecclesia, which is the gathering of the people who love God, right? So that's the gathering of the people. We often call that a church now. So ecclesia is a church gathering. And so that's where the word comes from. So if it seems like a weird or outrageous word, now you know that it is based in Hebrew. And so there's that. Okay. So yesterday we started in chapter 1, but really only the first few verses in chapter 1. And it was kind of like, why do we do anything? Like, what's the point of anything? I felt like that was really a lot of what it was. In some sense today, it seems to go on and on with that as well. This hits me really, really hard. So, like yesterday, I was like kind of excited about it because we had just read a little bit before that about sort of where our hope comes from, right? And it's the fear of the Lord, um, and not in like being good or being bad or doing right or doing wrong or how much we have or how much we don't have. And then we hit on this book of Ecclesiastes, and he's kind of saying the same thing. I struggle with this kind of stuff all the time. Not with this idea of being hopeless, although in some ways there's that too. But like, I love studying human behavior. I love to see what makes people tick or why people do certain things, why I did certain things, why I continue to do certain things. Like, why on earth do I still sin? Like, I know that there is a God. I know that this is my belief. And I believe it's true. So I'm going to say it as if it's a true statement. I know there's a God. I know that God is watching me. I know he knows my every step, right? Like, he can see. I know that I speak to him. I ask him for things. I pray to him. I lift things up to him. I worship him. And yet that same person who does those things goes out and sins, right? I have like a fear of man. And so I might not be fully honest, right? I might not confront situations that I'm supposed to. I might gossip about things I'm not supposed to be gossiping about. And I'm sure there are, like, I'm giving you probably some of like the easier, more acceptable sins, right? Like, there are things that I still do that I still have a lot of struggles with, even though I know there is a Lord. And so there's a lot of like whys in there. Why is there still poverty in the world? Why is there death? Why is it, right? Like, there are all these whys. And I can cover it over really easily and just being like, well, God is God. And you know, but he hits on a lot of that in here. And so if you have some of those same thoughts, right? Like, some of you are very logical. Some of you are extremely black and white. He says this, I do this, right? But sometimes I don't even know what's right or what's wrong. So there, you know, I come to those kind of decisions like, this seems right at the time, and this also seems right at the time, right? And so we can go one of two ways. Which one is God asking me to do? What about a job? Should I go to the job or should I not go? Was he offering me the job or wasn't he offering? Like, right? So there's all these things that go in my head. And so I think Solomon is hitting on some of these things. And I feel like in some ways he has answers. So he doesn't save the answer to the end, which very interestingly enough is what I thought that he did in reading it in prior times. But now, much like a Song of Solomon, that if you've been with me the past few days, I do not care for that book. I don't get a lot out of it. I felt that way about this one as well, but this time this one really lit up to me. So today's reading, I thought, was really it really connected with me on a really personal level. So saying that, I want to get into it because I talked longer than I should, as usual. So, all right, so we're still in Ecclesiastes 1, and we're down to verse 12. And he had given some kind of like poetry before that, and now he's sort of into prose. And he goes back to himself. He's talking about himself. He says, I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. So he reiterates this. He said it already. He's saying it again. Again, we're saying it's likely that it's Solomon. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom, because he was given the gift of wisdom. So he's applied his mind to study and explore all that is done under the heavens. So he's decided he's going to look around and he's just going to study anything and everything that he can possibly study. He's in a time of peace, and I'm not saying he's not ruling a kingdom, but he's not in a time of war. David has left him with safety on all sides. The Lord has left him with safety on all sides through David, right? And so he's in this time of peace. And so he's just taking the time to explore everything. He's been given abundant wisdom. And so he is using that wisdom to kind of like figure out everything that's going on. Why do the animals do this? Why does the world look like that? Why does the sun rise? Why are there stars, right? Like, he's trying to figure everything out. Why does mankind do what mankind does? And that's what we're getting a flavor of here. And again, that's what I find so interesting, because I feel like there's a lot of that in me. I want to study some of those things. I like the study of that stuff. So he says, and then he follows up. He says, what a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. And he says this twice. So there's an importance to it, because he repeats it. And he thinks God has given them, given humans, given us a burden. Like being in and part of this world is a burden. So if you feel like life is sometimes a burden, you're in really good company. because Solomon, the wisest man that ever existed, the richest man that ever existed, the king of the entire nation of Israel, that man also says, "What a heavy burden you have laid on us." Then he says, "I've seen all the things." I'm not going to read every verse, but kind of like I'm just trying to lay out a landscape here. "I've seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind." So as he goes and he views everything that's going on, he's like, there is not meaning amongst all of this stuff. You do this, you do that, you do this, the animals do this, right? And there's no meaning, right? There's no hardcore meaning to it. The sun doesn't rise. Oh my gosh, I see a little, wow, I just saw a little mouse on my fence over there. Just pointing it out. You can't even see it, but it took me, I glanced at it. Okay, so he's saying all of it is meaningless, that there's nothing to it. There's nothing like he's really necessarily gleaning from it. He's saying, and this is why, same as we were talking yesterday, what's crooked can't be straightened. So if it's crooked, it's crooked, right? It can't be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. So kind of like, and we as a generation now use this expression, it is what it is, right? So in some ways, it is what it is. And so we don't have the power necessarily to change it. So I look and I study all these things and we don't have the power to change it. Like the truth of the matter is the weather comes, the weather goes, right? Like today, it was supposed to rain for a little bit. I have no control over that. It's either going to or it's not going to. Just because the weatherman says it's going to, and then he doesn't, I have no power to make it rain or not. Right? Like it is what it is, and I don't have any power over it. So in some ways, he's saying it's futile. And then he goes to, he says, "I've increased more in wisdom," again, which makes me think that it's Solomon. Verse 17, he says, "Then I applied it to myself. I applied to myself the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is chasing after the wind." So he's like, I took this wisdom, and so I kind of like dove into this wisdom, and I dove into madness and folly. So he's checking out all things. He's kind of viewing it from every perspective, from every angle. So we follow what we follow as followers of God, right? So like in what we believe is wisdom. And then he's like, I'm going to check this out too, because they say this is pretty great. And so I'm going to follow in this direction as well. And again, he's like, it's always full. So he says, and then this one verse, so moving down into Ecclesiastes 2, verse 3, he said, "I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom." So he's wisely doing this. He's not doing it without an understanding. So he's doing it to check it out, but he's not doing it without the understanding. Like he's not losing his wisdom in doing it. However, he does say he could fall into that place, but he hasn't fallen into that place. In verse 4, he says, "I undertook great projects. I'm building these houses, these reservoirs. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. Right? All these things. I have all these slaves. I have all these flocks. I have all these people underneath me. I acquire all these things. I'm far greater than anybody else." And he says, "In all this, my wisdom stayed with me." And then he says, "I denied myself nothing. I took anything and everything I wanted. I denied myself nothing." Verse 11, "Yet," so here's the big but. So he had anything and everything that his heart ever desired. I want to note that he had anything and everything his heart ever desired. You, me, anyone around us, right? We all desire, right? We all have these desires. It might be something, it might be someone, it might be more money, it might be a better job, it might be more status, it might be popularity, more friends, right? Like we all have desires. So he's not denying that there's a reality to that situation. He got all the desires he wanted. And then he says, "Yet," or even though I got everything I wanted, "when I surveyed all my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless." Everything was meaningless. So he got it all. Think of like the person you are most jealous of in the entire world. And you think, man, if only I had what they had. He's saying that's meaningless. And he had by far more than any of those other people. Like, nowadays it would be planes, cars, homes, islands, right? Like he had the ability to have everything. And then he follows up and he says in verse 12, then I turn my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. So then he kind of like thought about all those things. Like, I consider all these things. What more can they do? And I see wisdom is better. But even in that, so he's like, even in wisdom, it's meaningless. So I can be the smartest person in the entire world, and even that is folly. Even that doesn't matter. Why? Death takes all of us. So at the end of the road, we're all going to die. Every single person, right? So the same fate kind of awaits all of us. He says to himself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? Right? So he's like, after I used wisdom to do all these things, then I was like, ooh, let me think about wisdom. Think about how great it is to be so smart. And he's like, that's folly too. Being the wisest person in the world, that's folly also. Then he followed 17, he says, so I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. So he's just frustrated. He's like, he's so frustrated. He's toiling, he's doing all of these things, right? And it's for nothing. It's so pointless. And he said in verse 21, so for a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave it all to another who hasn't worked that hard for it. So he's like, I work my whole life, and then I die, and then everything I worked for goes to somebody else. They didn't even do anything. Do you see where we're going with this? Right? And I'm sure, and again, we've all been there. We've all had these thoughts. So what does it matter? So verse 24, he says, a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink. And here's the thing. This is the important thing. And find satisfaction in their own toil. This I see is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? So he's like, I had it all. I know I'm reiterating these things. I had it all. I was so smart. I focused on how smart I was. I focused on all that I had, and it was nothing. But when I found contentment in anything that I did, that contentment is from the Lord, right? Without him, nothing matters. So he's letting you know now, what is the answer? What's the answer to all these things? God is the answer to all of these things. God is where you're going to find contentment, where you're not going to be striving to do anything else. So toiling, just so we know, toiling is if you don't know it, and maybe you do, but toiling is like incessantly working. Like it's hard, intensive labor, incessantly working all the time. All right, and then it moves on to chapter 3. And in chapter 3, for anyone who is my age or older, you probably hear the song Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds. So you kind of have to pull that out and trying to figure out what it is that he's saying. And what he's saying is he's going back to this original thing where he goes back earlier when he says what's crooked can't be straight, right? Like those kinds of things. He's saying there's a time for everything. There's a time and a season. So just to throw out some of these, there's a time to be born and a time to die. Like it just, again, it is what it is, right? Not that for those health nuts that I know out there, not that we can't stay healthy or we shouldn't stay healthy, but who do you know that is smoked every single day of their life and they're 102? The truth of the matter is that happens, right? And then somebody they're a vegan and they follow all the rules and they don't eat sugary snacks and they do, right? And they keel over at 60 from a heart attack. Right. So these things do happen. You know, someone's going to probably push against me and be like, well, it's an anomaly. It happens. So there's a time to be born. There's a time to die. There's a time to heal. There's a time to tear down, a time to build. Right. So like there are times and seasons for everything. You might be in the time of having no kids. You might be in the time of just having babies. You might be in the time of your kids like me. My kids are in college. Right. Like so there's a time and a season for everything. And part of this is are you finding contentment in that time and in that season, right? Verse 9, it goes down to, what do workers gain from their toil? I've seen the burden God has laid on the human race. That was the second one. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. So like we're like, oh my gosh, what does eternity look like? He set it in us. We know that there is, most of us will say, some won't, but most of us will say, there has to be something after this place. There just has to be. Like this can't be enough. YOLO can't be a real thing, right? So there has to be something beyond this place. What is it? Is it better than here? Do I do this again? Right? For those of you who believe in reincarnation, like we happen over and over again, do I do this again? But there's something. It's not like it's death and silence and nothing is after it. So he says we set eternity in our hearts. Yet, here we go again, no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. So we have this idea of eternity, but we don't even understand or know what to do with it. But again, verse 13, they may eat and drink and find satisfaction. Find satisfaction in whatever it is that you do. Going down, he says, I saw something else. Wickedness is here. So instead of judgment and justice, there's wickedness. Why? It doesn't seem right. It says, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge. And then it says down here, this is one of the things I wanted to note, because I've been in a system that says some of these same things over and over and over again. It says, God doesn't want you to be happy. He wants you to be holy. I have repeated that time and time and time again. However, saying all that, it says, oh, now, of course, I can't find it. It says, verse 22, it says, so I saw that there is nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work because that is their lot. But that's not what it is. It says to be happy. One dies, so does the other, all the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals. Anything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust. Oh, I think it said it earlier. Oh, I'm going to go back to verse 12. It says in verse 12, I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live. Sorry, I know I had to rewind to do that. There's nothing better than to do good, be happy, and do good while they live. But happiness is contentment and satisfaction. So then he goes over that later where it's all about satisfaction. You're going to see bad stuff. You're going to live bad stuff. Can you have satisfaction in that stuff, right? That might be the time for that. And you need to learn and grow from those things. But can you be satisfied in recognizing that there is a time for that? It says in chapter 4, verse 1, again, I looked and I saw oppression is taking place. These people have no power, right? They have no comforter. So like really bad thing. We see some stuff, but there's so much stuff we don't see. Like right now, there's like sort of an uprising where the oppressed is sort of like trying to come up and oppress the oppressor, so to speak. Like we're really trying to reverse roles. But there's a lot of things that we don't see. And there are a lot of people that are oppressed that have nobody to stand up for them. They have no system in which to be lifted up, right? And everything will find that season because everything cycles, which is exactly what he's saying. It says in verse 6, it says, better one handful with tranquility, right? This is about how we're supposed to behave, than two handfuls with toil and chasing the wind. This is a turning and changing of your heart. Same thing, chapter 4, verse 7. Not good to be alone. It says there was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. And then in verse 9, it says, but two are better than one. So there's comfort in finding companionship, not being alone. Then in verse 13, they're talking about political power. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning. So it's better to be poor and wise than it is to be rich and a king and all these wonderful things, right? Being all those things is somehow chasing after the wind. Chapter 5, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. You go and you listen. These are how we grow in some of these areas. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. Don't be quick with your mouth. This is like a lot of the Proverbs that I told you were springing up to me. Don't be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. If you can take away anything from what I've been doing, it's about being more silent, sitting, waiting, and listening as I sit here and talk to you for 30 minutes. When you make a vow, do not delay to fulfill it. Don't say like, oopsie, I didn't mean to make that vow. It even says it here. Don't let your mouth lead you into sin, and don't protest the temple messenger saying, oops, my vow was a mistake. Follow through. If you made a vow, you made it. Follow through on it. Be honest with the Lord. Do what you promised him you're going to do. None of these things are easy, but we must find satisfaction in the things that we do. even when they are difficult. One of the things that I am noticing about the world over and over and over and over and over again is we are shooting for the easy. Those of us who are older are trying to make life easier for those that are younger. Those that are younger just want everything to be easy. Understandably so, because they're young and they're not wise yet. But we are making it easy for them. And even me doing this, like in some ways, I feel like I'm making it easier for you, which is why I strive to ask you over and over and over again to read, right? To really dig in and to learn and to grow with your own mind before you come to this, and kind of listen and feel like, see if we're sharing some similar ideas, right? So before that. All right. And then going down, we're going to do a huge chapter on wealth. So in verse 8, it says, if you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, don't be surprised. One official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still. So again, there's a time, there is a season. This is, don't toil in this. Don't get mad. It doesn't say don't give. It says don't toil and don't get frustrated. And it says in verse 10, whoever loves money never has enough. Figure out where you are in this. I feel like most of us probably lie on the spectrum of loving money and really having to, in some ways, conquer that desire, because it says, as goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners? So you have a whole bunch of stuff. So what? What's the point of it? The reality is we're comparing it to somebody with us. And this is what he talks about as well. You don't want to hoard wealth. It's one of the evils done under the sun, is wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners. So you don't want to sit on. Now, it follows not long after, so we got to be careful about this too. It follows not long after, and it says, don't waste all your money so you have nothing to give your children. But it also says, don't hoard it. So there's this middle ground of releasing your heart to it and recognizing that if it's there, it's there. If you give it, you give it, right? Like, so there's some semblance of finding contentment and peace with what comes in, and being okay for what goes out as well. Verse 18, it says, this is what I've observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them. Your time here is short. For this is their lot. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions, so like you don't have a lot, you have a lot. This is the gift of God. This is what God gives. Find satisfaction in what you have. It says a lot of people with wealth, they're not even satisfied with it. So then I want to just follow up in near the end, Ecclesiastes 6. It says, verse 10, whatever exists has already been named, and what humanity is has been known. Humans have been humans all through time. No one can contend with someone who is stronger. The more the words, the less the meaning. And how does that profit anyone? Verse 12, for who knows what is good for a person in life during the few and meaningless days they pass through like a shadow? Who can tell them what will happen under the sun after they're gone? And this is where he's leaving us. So I think he's given us some stuff to sit on. Satisfaction is important, and God is important. And I think without God, we can't find satisfaction. We're going to move on. We're going to continue into Ecclesiastes tomorrow. And so if you have liked this, if this has been a blessing to you, please hit the like button. Please share it. Subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell so you get notifications. I send them out every single day. And until then, as I continue to say, keep reading, read your Bible, read your Bible, read your Bible, and I will see you guys next time.